Welcome to the second part of a two-part mini video series about Maruki. In the first part, which is over on Tommy's channel, we kind of talked about Maruki and his philosophy and his role in the game. But now we're here to have a good old-fashioned debate. So why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves?
All right, what's up? I'm Tommylmao. I mostly do sort of Hololive VTuber related content, but I also do Persona stuff and various games every now and then. So maybe check me out on my channel.
Hey guys, it's Wright. I'm just a friend of Tommy that is very interested in talking about Maruki and also just a lot of other philosophical topics. So I'm just here to discuss that stuff with Fither and Tommy.
Nice. All right, so I'm a strange sort of third party in this debate. You guys are the ones who are really going to be going at it. I think I'll just be chiming in from time to time to kind of give my thoughts, but why don't you guys go ahead and kind of state your positions then?
Sure. Okay. So I am of the firm belief that Maruki's world is strictly better than our own, and if hypothetically Maruki could do what he did in Persona 5 Royal and overwrite our reality with his own reality, the world would be a much better place. Almost all of the unsolvable problems of our society and our world as a whole would be solved. And I think that it is not only, I think it's straight up unethical and immoral to stop his world from becoming reality. And I think that just straight up what the Phantom Thieves did at the end of Persona 5 Royal by destroying his palace and preventing Maruki's reality from becoming the true reality was just morally wrong. And that's my position. I honestly am so set in my convictions. I don't think anything anyone will say will change that. And that's just me being honest.
So you're basically Steven Crowder. I can't change your mind.
Don't fucking compare me to that guy ever, but sure.
Yeah, no, my position is almost of the complete opposite, I would say. I think we do agree on certain things, but I think generally with Maruki's world, though it may be on the surface better in some ways, I think overall the things that are sacrificed in the process are so you have to sacrifice so much to the point where I feel like we'd be worse off in some sense. When it comes to concepts of perhaps liberty and free will, we would automatically lose that, I would argue. I would say that Maruki himself as an individual, I don't know if we can specifically trust him with such a grand amount of power. And also just generally, I don't know if he is in any position to judge everybody in the way he does. I don't think that's right in any way. I don't think he has any right to do that.
I don't really have anything against Steven Crowder. I don't know why I said that. But I want to sort of lay out my ideas about Maruki and about his reality. And I sort of want to gauge your guys' ideas or opinions on that. So I'll just sort of get started. We talked in part one a little bit about whether or not pain is necessary. I took this stance that it, strictly speaking, wasn't. If you could remove pain from all pain from the world, you'd be sort of morally bankrupt to not do that. Fither sort of took the more enlightened approach and said it's necessary for growth, but if you removed all pain from the world, it would sort of be a very stale world, which sort of makes sense. Wright took the approach where it was necessary for a bunch of various biological and blah 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 reasons. And just I have some sort of things that I just want to bring up. So, one, some people just from birth are giving such raw deals that they literally cannot overcome their problems. They don't have the luxuries that we have to sort of grow from, the adversity that we overcome. Some people just straight up, just because of a bad dice roll, they just don't have, they aren't afforded those luxuries. And that sort of ties in my second point, and that we're privileged enough to grow from our pain. Statistically speaking, throughout history, most people haven't had that opportunity. Also, Maruki could and would likely be able to cure things like physical abnormalities. Whether it was Ryuji's legs as an example, but probably more common things like blindness, deafness, losing limbs, all these sorts of things. I think it's not unreasonable to suggest that Maruki could probably actualize those out of existence. So that's another thing I want to talk about. Also, it's unrealistic to suggest world hunger and world peace can be achieved naturally, or in a way that sort of makes sense in our own reality. Those problems will probably never be solved, just strictly because of human nature. And I got a few more I'll probably talk about later, but those are sort of the points that I thought of in support of Maruki, and I want to sort of get your guys' opinion on it.
I think the concept of everything you brought up, that he would be eliminating, like, say, world hunger, perhaps all crime, or perhaps many other horrible things that happen on a daily basis to us, I think is a bit ill-founded. On the premise that he himself doesn't seem to have the ability to fix every single issue in the world, due to the fact that the whole world within itself is interconnected. They all are living in this singular reality. And I understand that, like, throughout the story, he states, like, oh, like, suffering and pain brings nothing but ruin to people. Why would you force yourself into such situations? Like, I want to save you. That's all I want to do. But it seems to me that he, like, just because he does have that power doesn't mean he should always invoke it, in a sense. Like, yeah, he could be able to cure world hunger, but of course it will be at the cost of something, of course. Somebody else will have to suffer just because of what he wants, right? And I know generally, yes, it sounds like a net positive, but, like, I think we're seeing it way too much in a generalization. There's too much of a generalization here, because we're like, oh, he can do this, 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 and this. But in reality, like, since the world's so interconnected, his whole goal is not, like, to fix the world of all its issues. It's to make people, like, happy. He's not trying to fix the world. He's trying to make people happy. That's what he's trying to do. I think to have that very idealistic sense is a bit off.
I think it stands to reason that, like, a starving child, their pain would probably be removed by them having access to food. So I don't think it's really a stretch to say that he tried to grant that.
It's not that, per se. It's not that, like, he wouldn't do it. It's more to say the fact that, like, when it comes to more, like more complex issues, because I think at a certain point we're beyond, like, the concepts of, like, good and evil. Like, this starts to become very, like, a very big gray zone overall. And I think generally with Maruki, like just saying, oh, he's gonna save, like, a starving child, yeah, that's obvious. Like, we don't have to argue that at all. But when it comes to, like, more specific stuff that are, like, more questionable, I think that's where the issue lies here. That's the main issue here. Like, nobody's gonna argue, it's like, oh, like, child's dying of hunger, we shouldn't save him. Maruki wouldn't do it. No, he would. But, like, I think just saying these stuff, I don't think is getting to the actual issue here.
I'll throw us over to Fither then. Any thoughts on that? Like, just the amount of problems.
I think Maruki's sort of issue is the fact that, like, I feel like it's kind of impossible to truly please everybody. Like, here's just a random scenario I thought of, is two guys who, for them, absolute happiness would be dating this one girl, right? Maruki cannot grant this to both of these guys. What he could do, in theory, is make a second copy of the girl. But then at that point, he's just kind of an asshole who's just making people, right? So I think inevitably the kind of push and pull of, like, human happiness will, like, overextend what he's capable of, because, like, humans are not happy for very long stretches of time, right? Like, you get a new video game that you've been anticipating, and you're happy for about a week, right? And then you're miserable again. So I feel like Maruki, by just the nature of how humans operate, it's not going to be as simple as just, like, oh, you want this? All right, here's this. Because the human soul and the human drive for more will always catch up to him. You know, the millionaire is only happy with his $1 million until he wants 2 million, and then 10 million, and then 50 million. And it's the kind of thing that Maruki just can't continually grant like that until eventually the house of cards is just going to collapse on him.
I think it's a fair point. So how about to talk about sort of, like, healing people who are blind or deaf or cripples, things like that. I think it's been demonstrated in Persona 5 Royal that he was able to heal Ryuji's leg. Do you think it's feasible or realistic to suggest that Maruki would probably actualize, like, people's physical disabilities just out of existence and they'd be completely 100% normal?
I think if he thinks that's what will make them happy, then he will, yeah. Because part of the issue of it is that it's not a 100% objective, this is what will make you happy. It's Maruki's interpretation of what will make you happy. And I think that inevitably kind of leaves room for error. I feel like most of the time he's kind of just, he's gotten it right, more or less. Like, yeah, Ryuji, he wants to be happy by, you know, his leg works again, and he's on the track team, or for Futaba, it's like, yeah, my mom is back. But I feel like inevitably he's gonna kind of screw up, right? Because it's based on just like what he's reading of the person, and like there's always room for error when it comes to what you think would make somebody else happy.
Yeah, I think specifically with Maruki, like it's a combination of that, but also it seems like, of course, at heart he's a utilitarianist. He clearly does want like the greatest amount happening for the greatest amount of people, right? And with that, there seems to be like a clear conflict of interest always. Like, yeah, on the onset, it sounds like a good idea. Who doesn't want people to be happy, of course? But like, you would have to make some compromises over the course of the thing. Like, not everybody can be happy, like Fither said. Like, a lot of people are fickle with their happiness. And for that, like, he's always just spitballing, and he can get certain things wrong, and that can lead to more unhappiness, and then he would have to resolve that. And then, like, that can lead to even more unhappiness because people are always changing their minds on the perception of happiness. And then at that rate, it's like, is it feasible for him to do all of this? And for me personally, I don't think it is.
Okay. I know you want to bring up some points of your own, so I'll sort of give you the floor there.
Yeah, no, I think we've addressed like the main point here, just about the concept of, I want to bring up the concept of utilitarianism, specifically how it relates to Maruki. I think like at its core, it's really based off the initial like exciting event with Rumi specifically, and through her parents' death and everything. He basically like was an individual that had that traumatic experience and decided to rise up from it and try to find some meaning towards it. He didn't understand what it meant, and through there he is like, oh, I'm going to take this utilitarian approach where I'm going to try and make everybody happy, right? And so I think the question I want to ask specifically about this viewpoint is, most utilitarianists argue like the classical definition, basically like whatever can invoke the greatest amount of happiness to the greatest number of people, whatever it is, whatever you have to do it, as long as at the end of the day the most people are happy. It doesn't matter what the actions you do in between, as long as they're happy. So basically it's like a form of consequential moral philosophy. So basically like the ends justify the means. So I was wondering what your input is on that whole philosophy, whether you would agree with it, whether whatever Maruki does is reasonable or justifiable, as long as by the end of the day everybody's happy.
Fither, you want to take that?
That's why you take that one. It's a lot to unpack here.
God, he used a lot of words I don't really understand, but I guess I'll take a shot. Well, I'd say Maruki's philosophy is definitely based, but I will say that it's different from utilitarianism in one specific way, that I think a lot of times when you bring up utilitarianism, you'll get a lot of like sort of counter, arguments of like, let's say for example, like a classic one against utilitarianism, like there's a mob of people waiting outside of town, and they're ready to burn the town down and just kill a bunch of innocent people, unless you kill this one guy who is sort of, they think, committed this crime, but that guy's actually an innocent. And a utilitarian would say, yes, you should kill that guy even though he's innocent, because if you don't do that, well, a lot of more people will die. And like that sort of minimizes the sort of risks and dangers, and it maximizes technically like the amount of life and all that stuff. But I think it's important to note that we're talking about powers that aren't normal, obviously. Like Maruki isn't confined to like traditional sort of morality, in the fact that he can, in that example of that town, or that angry mob gonna burn down the town, he could literally just actualize it, or actualize the mob, so that they're straight up like don't have those kind of thoughts, or they're busy pursuing their art career, or I don't know, maybe bowling or something. But I think that I wouldn't really strictly say, or I wouldn't really agree that Maruki's strictly speaking a utilitarian, just because he's kind of got superpowers and he's basically the closest thing to like a god in human form as you can get. So I don't know if I'd really strictly agree that, with the premise that Maruki, subscribes to utilitarianism.
I disagree with that assumption completely, due to the fact that I don't think this has any relation to the concept of power. If anything, it seems to be enforced by it. Because if you look at the two who pioneered modern utilitarianism, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill specifically argues that if an individual has this extreme amount of power, that they should always invoke it in order to like pursue that happiness, in order to do to the greatest amount. So I don't think like Maruki's position specifically would like not make him a utilitarianist. That's what his whole like position is. He's trying to make the most people happy in the way he perceives that would lead to the greatest amount of happiness. I don't think, if anything, his power is pushing him towards that goal. because like he probably subscribes to the thing was like, oh, if I have the power to change the world, I should use that power to try to change the world. Like the Phantom Thieves do similarly as well, where they're like, oh, I have the power of persona, I have all these powers. Yeah, we should go change hearts because it would be a net positive for everybody.
Okay, but if you're arguing that, utilitarianism is flawed, thus Maruki's viewpoint is kind of flawed, then you're sort of also by proxy arguing that, by saying that the Phantom Thieves are also utilitarians, or it's similar in that regard, you're sort of arguing that what the Phantom Thieves are doing is also like inherently wrong, though.
That's not what I'm arguing here. What I'm arguing, it's not fundamentally that there's an issue with utilitarianism. There's always an issue with every single philosophy. I think the issue fundamentally here is that Maruki's power, specifically, and how that relates to him as a human, doesn't allow him to... I don't think it gives him any right to do, like, everything he does specifically. I think at a certain point, like, I understand that Mill, like, of course, makes that argument, like, oh, you should, like, use the power you're given to like help the greatest amount of people, right? But I think at a certain point, what he does, his actions, is what I'm judging here. It's not like I can make a whole argument against utilitarianism for like the rest of this stream and for the rest of this video, but there's no point in that. I think fundamentally what he's doing is wrong because he's taking away the free will. He's doing some actions that are very questionable, like what he did to Sumire specifically, where he's trying to make her relive her trauma so he can make her side with him. I think that's the fundamental issue here. The actions he does in order for them to be quote unquote happy.
Okay, I think that's actually a pretty sort of good discussion to have, and I kind of want to get Fither on this as well. I mentioned, or I remember in another Maruki video that he was part of, he also brought up the fact that like, yeah, what he's doing is sort of like forcing his own will on other people. But he also brought up the comparison in that video about like, is it really wrong to like force a child to go to the doctor? Or is it wrong to like force treatment on someone who otherwise doesn't want it? And I mean, in my opinion, like even if it sort of infringes on a person's free will, if it's ultimately for the betterment of that person, and at the end of the day, that person is better off after, sort of even if their sort of autonomy is violated or the free will is violated, I think that generally speaking, it's probably like better, or like the good sort of outweighs any sort of like infractions that were sort of like taken, I guess. I don't know, Fither, if you have like any sort of further thoughts on that, do you agree, do you disagree?
I think that my ultimate kind of issue with Maruki is the fact that it's being forced upon people. Like, ironically, I really have almost no problem with Sumire wanting to be Kasumi, and then, Maruki granting that, because that's something that she wanted. I take umbrage with the idea that this guy is going to read my mind and then decide for me what's best for me.
Okay, I think it's a pretty reasonable position. I don't know, right? You sort of put a lot of emphasis on free will and autonomy. Do you want to like elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, no. Specifically with Maruki, it seems to me that he is following like the classical like definition of utilitarianism, where it's like, oh, regardless of the situation, like what he did with Sumire, like he's like, oh, whatever I have to do in order to make them happy, whatever goes, right? I think that's the issue fundamentally here, that like his actions, the stuff he does to these people and forcing them to like confine to like this definition of happiness he has is the fundamental issue here. And I think Fither perfectly illustrated it with like, I think there's no issue with like Sumire wanting to be Kasumi, though I think there is a small issue there, but that's beyond the point. Ultimately, I think since he is like purely just based on this fundamental like classical definition, I think that's really leading to a lot of issues and a lot of like things that he does being very questionable and very bad. If you follow like a different form of utilitarianism, like perhaps I'm pretty sure the other one is called Rule Utilitarianism, where basically like it states that like there are certain like rules or certain laws that should like limit the things you do, but generally you should like probably help people. Then I would like say, yeah, he's probably doing somewhat of a good thing. But like since he's following everything he's been doing throughout the story seems to be following the classical definition, I have an issue with that fundamental. That he's forcing people to do stuff against their will and in very horrible and very inhumane ways, I would say.
Okay, I kind of want to, sort of touch on that. I just fundamentally disagree with like the fact that like what some of his actions are like inhuman or inhumane and like horribly like morally, wrong. I don't really think that's the case. I mean, you can maybe make the case that, like what he did to Sumire turning into Kasame, that like that would probably maybe be sort of like a little bit too much. But I sort of want to explore the idea of like, let's say, like if you were able to sort of like give all control to someone who has like just this sort of almost omniscient, not quite omniscient, but almost omniscient power, like, and that person like is like technically speaking like pretty established as someone who's just wants to do good for people, if that would sort of be like either like wrong or like just not a good idea. I kind of want to explore like whether or not that like actually would be a feasible thing to do. I would say that like it sort of goes against a lot of ideas about like freedom and autonomy and things like that. But my main argument is that this world that we live in, society, if you will, if you're gamers such as myself, it's so flawed. It's to a point where like, would it be better to just hand it over like in control of someone who has been proven to sort of be just benevolent and wants to just do good for as many people as possible? I think I'd argue that that would probably be just a straight up improvement on our own society that we live in. And I think because Maruki like could have actually actualized the Phantom Thieves out of existence to achieve his goal, I think that's a testament, and the fact that he didn't is a testament to sort of his goodwill and the fact that he's not, I wouldn't say morally corruptible. I would think that by doing such a thing, by giving someone like Maruki full control, even if that sort of like violates a lot of tenets about like freedom and things like that, because in my opinion, it would improve on the world we live in so much, it sort of seems to me like you would sort of be doing the world itself a disservice by denying that power to sort of be, in control, I'd say. It sounds like really counteracted to a lot of the sort of tenets that we fundamentally believe in. But I don't know if you guys have any further thoughts on that.
Tommy?
I would not trust any human to do it because humans are flawed, like in and of themselves, and people change over time. Like Maruki is already kind of showing signs of this like messiah complex, where he says stuff like, "Only I can do it. I was chosen. This, that." So who's to say Maruki is going to be?
When he says that, though, because like, how many other people can actually do that?
Well, I think what you're arguing for, Tommy, is you clearly seem to be a big fan of Hobbes, specifically with his whole argument that like you should give all the power to like one individual because he supported the concept of like a monarchy, right? Where he believed that like generally people like don't know what they're doing, and that like, it would be way better for the world if we gave all the power to one individual, and thus he would be able to like, sort all of this out, right? Make the world a better place. And so I think by looking in that sense, I think perhaps like Fither said, like since Maruki himself over the course of time like will change his outlook probably on a few things, that could like propose an issue, like that can pose an issue to like certain aspects of his world and how that might interfere with like his goal of happiness and how that might affect the people that he's controlling. I think that's an issue, and I guess like for you, where you think you should give it all to one man, I think is very flawed. And I think with Hobbes specifically, he would argue that like, oh, like we should take away their freedom because like we're giving it all to one guy, and he probably is the one who would be able to resolve the situation.
I mean, I think that giving total control to one person is it's not a good idea. Like, it's not ideal. But I think because the world is so flawed as it is, and like how it operates right now, that it would sort of be naive to suggest that a lot of the problems that exist with our current world could be solved without sort of the power of someone like Maruki. Like, just for example, like, I don't think world hunger could realistically ever be solved. I don't think world peace could realistically ever be achieved. And these are like two things that, like, just only two things that would make the world so much better that could literally never happen without, like, unless Maruki were to actually have control over the world. And I think just because of those, the amount of good those, like, solving those two would bring, like no more wars, no more famine, maybe disease, but maybe not. I think just on the merits of those two things alone, it would be enough for me to say, you know, even though I'm giving up my own autonomy, and even though I'm probably giving up a lot of my freedom potentially, I just think the amount of good that would be solved, the amount of good that would be brought up by solving these issues that wouldn't otherwise be solved, justifies sort of the actions that would be taken.
I think personally there's like two fundamental issues with that. Number one, I think specifically Maruki himself, like all the actions he's given, I guess like he's not given it to by anybody. Like nobody's giving him any right to rule at all. He's just like popping into this like, well, I guess I have all this power now, and I guess I'm gonna like force everybody to under my control. I think fundamentally that's like issue number one here, right? He never got power from anybody. He just got it because like he just got a persona, and thus he's gonna impose his will on everybody, right? And secondly, to answer your question about like specifically like, oh, if he can cure world hunger and all these issues, I think personally there's no evidence to point to the fact that Maruki, number one, will be able to do that, and number two, any reason for him to do that in the sense that his goal ultimately is to bring the most happiness to people. And yeah, I know you can correlate it as like, oh, if there's no more war, there would be more happiness, right? But like, you don't know if, first of all, fundamentally he can do that, and secondly, like,
that man can bring people back from the dead. You don't think he could solve world hunger?
They're not people from the dead, though. They're people that he creates in the reality to bring happiness to the individuals that want to bring that. By seeing that person back to life brings them a greater amount of happiness more than ever.
But he still has the power to do it.
He still has the power to do it, yes.
Sort of to the magnitude of, you know, his ability and how much he could do with his powers of actualization. I mean, he's basically one step away from being a god at this point. Like, with, like, at the state of, like, you know, when he gets, like, Adam Cadmon and all that, like, that's about, like, 1 inch from being, like, omnipotent.
I would disagree with that, specifically with where his power specifically originates from. We discussed this a bit in part 1, where like it comes from mementos, right? It comes from the cognition of everybody, right? And so like I wouldn't say he would ever probably get to a state of that, unless like perhaps like maybe he manipulate mementos in such a way that like everybody's cognition starts to become his because he's the one who imposes his will to become everybody's will. And I think then I guess that perhaps can be a thing. But that would, number one, either take a very long amount of time, or number two, would just be like very unfeasible just generally, because I don't think it's feasible for this one man to be able to solve 9 billion issues and solve them in such a way where like there would be no more issues ever in the world again. I don't think that's feasible just with his power alone or just by himself, you know? He's not like God, like you said. Yeah, he's like it looks like he's one step away. But ultimately, all his power is derived from that cognition of mementos, not from like some godly power. It's from the people in some weird roundabout way.
So I want to throw this discussion to Fither, right? Like, let's say, okay, I think it would be possible. Wright says it isn't, but let's just say hypothetically that he could and would solve issues such as, you know, world hunger, world peace, and probably 100 other things that I'm not really thinking of. Income inequality, blah, 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 blah. Like, if he would solve those things, Fither, do you think that would be a worthwhile thing, or that it would be justified in giving him absolute power just by the merits of solving these basically unsolvable issues?
I think the two kind of major issues for me is, first of all, like I said, the fact that he is human, and as a result, he is, like, flawed. And second is just the numbers game you have to play with, how much has to be done with this. Like, imagine for a second having to solve the problems of 100 people. Now multiply that several million times, and that's what Maruki has to do. I think eventually at some point you're gonna start half-assing it. Like, and like I said, people's interests naturally run into conflict with each other. Like, what do you do about the guy who will only be happy starting wars? What do you do about that guy? What do you do about the guy who wakes up every day happy about the fact that disease is a thing? Like,
hey, you can't be talking about U.S. Congress like that.
Yeah, what's Maruki gonna do about the United States government? Like, I think at that point, the only way to get rid of, like, certain people's desires is to make them, like, not exist anymore, or to just erase their existence as a person entirely. And I don't think that's like a good thing to do either.
Okay, but I mean, you can look at it like a micro scale, like just from what we've seen like in Persona 5 Royal, he was more or less able to do it like on the scale of like Japan. It's like from like going through like the subway in Shibuya and all that stuff. He could sort of was able to do it in like a much like obviously a lot like smaller scale, but it doesn't seem out of the question where he would be able to like sort of just like multiply that, or well, I don't know, maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, but it doesn't seem like completely out of the picture to suggest that he'd be able to do it like to the entirety of Japan, like beyond what we've seen in Persona 5 Royal. And if he was able to do that for an entire country, then like maybe it's not so much of a stretch to say he'd be able to do it for the entire world.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, like what we see in Persona 5 Royal is a very, very, very small microcosm of all that exists. Like, it's easy enough to sit there and say, oh yeah, Maruki, look at that. He fixed Futaba's problems. He solved Haru's issues. Oh, that's great. But like, billions and billions of people is something that we cannot really like comprehend how large of a number that is, and how many like different desires people have that run into conflict with each other, and just like the ever evolving need, or like people's ever evolving desires and want for more. I think like if Maruki kind of just limited himself to Japan, then that would be fine. But being how he is, he's gonna sit there and say, yeah, but those guys in Europe are having a rough time. Oh, I should get involved. And I feel like at that point, it's gonna be too much to handle, because he's just one guy at the end of the day.
That's a good point. I don't know, Ray, you want to talk about it a little?
Yeah, no, like I already stated prior, like I don't think it is feasible whatsoever that he'd be able to pull off such a thing. Like I just like, I think me and Fither have basically phrased it perfectly. Like I don't think it is possible for him to resolve all these issues because of the interconnectedness of the world and how people like act among each other and how like certain things can overlap. And since there's like 9 billion people on Earth, I don't see it feasible in any sort of way.
The thing about that is, I remember seeing, there's this Twitter account. It's called, Has Jeff Bezos Decided to End World Hunger? And basically what that account says is that Jeff Bezos just has enough money in, not even like just like straight up like cash money, but like assets. If he sold all of that, he could literally have the power to solve world hunger. And just like, it's a huge problem, and it's like almost unbelievable to like really think about how to solve it. But like people have found that if you just spend enough money in like creating food distributions throughout the entire world, because like we literally do have enough food to feed everybody in the entire world. Like it's a hard problem to solve, but not really by merits of like we don't have the capacity to solve it. It's just that we don't really have the people who have the ability to solve it just straight up don't, because of reasons of like just because they want to make more money. So I mean, we could probably, I mean, I'm just gonna keep saying, it is feasible to solve world hunger, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I don't think
I want to.
Yeah.
No, I just want to say one thing about world hunger specifically. If he were able to solve the issue, let's just say it is feasible for one.
Yeah.
That he's able to solve the problem. I think the other issue that we'll encounter is what will happen when Maruki eventually, let's just say he passes away, he's gone then. I think, like with world hunger specifically, it's kind of a rough issue to deal with because of the fact that, number one, of course, the human population increases drastically every year. And at a certain point, it will be impossible to feed everybody. At a certain point when the population gets to that point, I don't know if Maruki would want at that rate to like perhaps like cap the human population, and then that can become a whole issue. But like I think there are like issues with that as well. Like at a certain point, he would have to change a lot of things in order to solve a problem like world hunger.
Okay,
like
but
completely, like 100%.
I mean, again, it could really be solved like today. It's not even, you don't even need Maruki today to solve world hunger. Like it could literally be solved if enough people, not even enough people, if a few people even just decided like, okay, I'm just gonna sell off my assets and decide to like feed everyone, because we have the materials to do it. We have enough food. We can very easily feed everyone. It's just that because these people want more money, they decide not to. And I mean, we can feed them. We could feed everyone now. And if technology increases like I mean, up to a point, Earth's become so populated that there's realistically maybe we can't feed everyone, but I mean that's a very, very long ways away. I just think that like Maruki could realistically actualize like a select handful of people, like Jeff Bezos, just for one, like literally just Jeff Bezos, and that could solve world hunger. I think just because of the amount of good that would produce, I think it's immoral to sort of not side with that. But that's
yeah, no, I think I gotta just put the cap on this whole debate of world hunger. I don't think.
Fair enough, but there's one other thing I want to talk about that admittedly goes against my argument. If we accept Maruki's world, Morgana becomes human, and it's implied that he ends up with An. So I'm no longer cucking Morgana, and I can't have that. So just forget about it. I no longer want Maruki's world.
So, I guess we could end the video there. I no longer want to do it.
That sucks, man. I had a lot more to say, but I guess
keep going.
Yeah, no. I want to move on a bit. I want to specifically discuss Maruki as like an individual and what flaws specifically he may have and how that might play into his like governance and the way he like rules the world, I guess, in that sense. Do you think there will come a point that Maruki himself would be like, he'd be like perhaps corrupted by that power to the point where like we should no longer trust him to make like rational decisions the way he does at all?
I don't know. I don't think so, man. I mean, again, I mentioned earlier, like, if Maruki was really, really just wanted us out of the way, and he really did believe so much, which I think he did, about like what he was doing, he could have erased the Phantom Thieves, or legitimately could have just went up to Joker in LeBlanc and just like killed him. And
kind of did that.
Not to. What do you mean?
He kind of did in the bad ending, where if you miss the deadline, he basically like comes to you. He is like, well, you didn't hit the deadline. I guess I'm going to trap you in the attic of LeBlanc forever. And that's what he did.
I did see that. That was very... I almost want to say it was like out of character and it was sort of just like a throw-in, like a shoe-in, just because like...
No, but like I think that's the first clear sign that like Maruki himself, like he might look like a great like benevolent being. And yeah, he like fundamentally his intentions from the start, it does seem like that, but I think over time, like just generally power seems to corrupt any individual no matter how great their intentions are. And I think perhaps Maruki can fall into that vein. I think that's the issue here.
I think a reason...
I don't know if you have anything to say about that yet.
I want to toss it over to Fither. He hasn't said it.
Yeah, Fither, I was gonna ask you.
I think that like people becoming corrupted by power is kind of an inevitability. Like you look back at history at how many people have been like, I'm gonna be the guy that fixes everything, and things are then not fixed at all, right? Like Maruki is like what, 30 something? That's not a very long time to be alive. Like right now, sure, he's at that phase where he thinks, yeah, I'm gonna do all this great stuff. I'm so humble. I'm this. I'm that. But 20 years from now of doing this thing where he, like, knows everybody's thoughts, can grant everybody's wishes, can do whatever he wants, I think at some point he's going to get a little bit of a big head. And eventually it's going to become less and less about, like, oh, the happiness of people, and more about, oh, the reign of King Maruki, essentially. Even if he doesn't, like, consciously think of it like that, I think in the back of his mind, he is going to end up developing that sense that he's like, he's the big shit, right?
I mean, that's a good point. And I mean, kind of hard to argue against it. I think what separates, like, in the past, people who have tried to, like, people who have been in power and who have had all the power and obviously, like despotic rulers and all that, it never went well. I think what separates probably like that, or like Maruki from all that sort of stuff is it's a few like certain like differences. One, like a lot of these rulers like became corrupted and became like sort of did all like the terrible things that they did, like because of like opposition, because it like in fear of them losing their place, their positions of power. I think what separates Maruki from that is that there realistically isn't anyone who can stand up against them. Once the reality is overwritten, like nobody can undo it. Nobody can challenge his power or anything like that. Another thing is that, wait, I lost my train of thought. I think that's a big one. Oh yeah, another thing, like the ego thing, like sort of developing a big head and, thinking they're God. what sort of prevents that from happening to Marky, I think, is that nobody knows about what's happening. Like, nobody knows that someone's like changing the world fundamentally, and you know they're creating this reality where everyone's desires is fulfilled and all that. And because like nobody knows about what Marky's doing and the fact that he's doing any of it, I think that sort of prevents like insane ego inflation. At least that's what I think.
Ooh, I don't know, because, like, we might not know that Maruki is up to whatever, but he absolutely knows what he's doing. So I feel like even if he doesn't have the adoration of the masses, like, he knows, right? He knows that everybody's happy because of him. And I feel like that is a very easy way to get a big head.
Yeah, that's a good point. But, like, I don't suspect he's just gonna, like, be running around saying, like, oh, you guys gotta thank me because, like, I did all this stuff for you. Like, oh, I brought back your wife for one. And, like, he's not just gonna be going around, like, sort of preaching that. Well, I mean, yeah, I think probably eventually something like that could potentially happen, but I just think like, would he really just like go against like everything he's been doing and just decide to like sort of fuck everybody's shit up after a while? I don't know, maybe so, but like, from what I know of Maruki, I just find that very hard to believe that he would really ever do that.
Yeah, I the way I see it, like, I think even in isolation, I don't think he has to go around and be like, oh, I'm the hero, Like, I think just generally over time, like, just the fact that he knows that he is the sole reason for why, quote unquote, everybody's happy is like enough reason for him to, like, perhaps develop an ego. He already, from the onset, has, like, clearly a messiah complex. He clearly has, like, some delusion of grandeur that he can, like, fix the world, because of what happened to Rumi. He, like, on the offset, like, has acquired this great power in the form of Azafoth, and then later Adam Cadmon, that he like now believes like, oh yes, I'm the only one that can fix this problem. I'm the only one that can like resolve all the world's issues. I'm the one who's gonna impose my will of happiness towards everybody. I think just from that, just fundamentally from where he started, I think that's enough reason to like question whether he will develop an ego like that. I don't think it's like fair to say that he probably would not. I think he would.
But literally none of that is hyperbole. Like, he literally is the only one who can do that. He literally has the only person who has the power to do that. He's not like just saying this like, oh, look at me, I'm so awesome. Like, he's literally speaking facts.
No, I don't think that's the case. I think that we can this is just gonna loop around forever, but I think he thinks he can do all of this. He can fix all the world's issues, or just like whatever he wants to fix, like specifically with happiness. But just because he thinks he can do it, and just because he thinks he has the power to do it, doesn't mean it's very feasible that he's able to do it. I think that's a fundamental issue here. Just because, like, yeah, it looks like from the onset, the way we see it, or I guess the way you see it, is like, oh, he has all this power, it looks like he can do all of this, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that he will be able to do it. And let's just say he won't be able to do it. That would really cause an issue to him then, because he's already starting his whole thing off that he is able to do it, and then when he realizes he can't do it, I think that will cause an issue in his psyche, and I think that would just fundamentally might cause a big issue with his ego.
It seems like the worst case scenario, if we are in Maruki's world, is that he wouldn't be able to do enough. Like that seems to be what the precipice of this argument is. Like, oh, he maybe wouldn't be able to like completely like eradicate or like completely create world peace, or he wouldn't be able to completely cure world hunger. Even if he comes close, wouldn't you say that was like doing enough good to justify his sort of existence and basically his rule?
I don't think so. I think personally, for me, I see it in the sense that he's literally taking away everything, like, from everybody in order to like impose this view of happiness. And like, I think the Phantom Thieves' argument against all of this fundamentally is like, people like might experience pain and might experience all this hardship, but it's up to those people to decide what they want to do with that. And to have somebody like Maruki take that opportunity away from them to do what they want to do in their life is the fundamental issue here. I don't know if you have anything to say about it, Fither.
There you go.
Yeah, no.
I would say, I think ultimately my problem with Maruki is the fact that it's being forced upon people. Like, if Maruki opens up like, oh yeah, Maruki's clinic where I will solve every problem you have, then that would be fine, right? Because then you are of your own volition going and saying, Dr. Maruki, please, like, do this to my life. But it's the fact that he is arbitrarily deciding what is best for you, I think, is where, like, I kind of crossed the line with what he's doing.
Yeah, no, I think personally it's portrayed probably best for Akechi. Akechi, like, his whole thing is like he's well aware that he will die without Maruki. Like, if Maruki isn't there with his reality, he's gone. But regardless of that quote unquote fear of death, he still goes against him because to him, and I guess to maybe a lot of people, and I guess to the Phantom Thieves as well, their opportunity to choose what they want with their lives is far more important than having somebody like dictate like supposedly what they think will be your ideal world when they like can't with 100% actually decide like that's actually the right thing, you know? It's that like thing of taking that away from them, and Akechi seems to like understand that and say, I know I'm gonna die, but I'd rather die on my own accord than have this like guy take over for me, you know?
Okay, so it sort of seems like we've brought to the table like most of the ideas that we sort of wanted to talk about, unless I don't know if either of you guys want to bring up anything else to discuss.
I think I've pretty much laid out all my cards on the table when it comes to Maruki.
Yeah, I think I've also kind of laid out most of the things. I have a lot more other things I can discuss, but if I do bring them up, I think it would just lead to just more cycles of just what we've been saying over and over.
Okay.
So I think
So I guess we'll do sort of closing arguments, sort of like a sort of summary of our thoughts and like sort of what we've taken away, I guess. I guess for me, like, again, I'm of the opinion that like even if it's violating the autonomy of like just the masses, and even if he's not able to fully end or solve all the problems, all the major problems that are strictly speaking unsolvable in our society, if he's able to come close, and if he's able to prevent a lot of the evil that happens on a day-to-day basis and on a mass scale, I think that just because of that, because of the sheer amount of good that he could do, I think that it's worth it to sort of justify his rule. I think that you guys bring a lot of good points about like how, you know, by doing that, you're sort of giving up your freedom, and like how much freedom are we really, you know, sort of willing to give up. And I think those are good points. I'm just of the opinion that there's so many problems that could be solved that aren't, just because of human nature. And if we give power to someone like Maruki, who's been proven to, you know, be mostly basically benevolent and basically looking for the sort of interests of everyone, then I just feel like it's worth it. That's just where I stand. But I think you guys brought up a lot of good points. Right, you want to take it? And then we can sort of end on Fither's sort of takeaways of this whole discussion/debate.
Yeah, no, I feel like personally for me, I think I still stand with my point that what Maruki's doing, I think fundamentally is kind of flawed with what he does with the concepts of revoking people's freedoms, imposing his will of happiness on people. I think that's wrong. And if I want to close on one thing, I think personally, his Messiah complex is best symbolized through the Garden of Eden, and where you fundamentally face him in the very top of the tree of knowledge. And just the fact that that's what he envisions for humanity is very troubling, because I think to me it says that he's willing, in his idyllic sense, he wants to go back to a state where people had no idea what was right or wrong. People did not think for themselves, or they had no freedom whatsoever, and instead were always under the guise of a god, which I feel like that whole area symbolizes what Maruki represents and what he wants for humanity, and I think that's not right.
Yeah, I'd say that I pretty much agree. Like, I would say I don't have a problem with the idea of, like, if there's some flawless, omnipotent god being who's just gonna fix all of our problems, then that's fine. But I think a human trying to fix problems that are just, like, innate to humanity is kind of a bad idea. Like, even if he is perfectly good intentioned, inevitably I think he is going to screw up, and I don't feel like the sacrifice of free will and the ability for people to, like, choose their own destiny and not be under his thumb it's not really worth the trade-off in my mind.
And I think that just about covers it. If you want to do the outro here for
there is no outro. But yeah, no, yeah, I think this is a really good debate. I think you both brought up some really good points. Like, obviously I'm a little bit biased towards, like, agreeing with Wright, but it's one of those kinds of things where, like, I really can't sit there and say definitively, objectively, Maruki is wrong. And I think that's part of, like, the beauty of him as a character, is the fact that, like, even if I do totally disagree with, like, what he's doing, I can still sit there and be like, okay, like, I get it. like I get why, you know.
Yeah, no, like that's why I find like a lot of joy in discussing this as well, because like personally, like you could bring a lot of stuff onto the table. Like for me, while playing Persona 5 Royal, like I was studying like political thought and many other like humanities courses, and I'm a bio major, so it's really weird that I'm studying all this stuff, but it's part of my college curriculum. And while reading all this stuff, I just found it very fascinating how he's able to correlate so many of these thoughts into Maruki's character. Like, I could have brought up millions of thinkers off the top of my head, and they would all like have something different to say about Maruki, and I find that very fascinating. And just the fact that like nobody can agree fundamentally like whether what he's doing is right or wrong, is very, very fascinating to me. And I think it would always be like an endless debate.
Yeah. I mean, Maruki, just the fact that we're able to basically talk about him for like almost like an hour and a half between these two videos, it's just testament to like Atlas's writing and like their world building and just the strength of their writers to be able to create this character who's so like realistic, and so we could legitimately have like a real world discussion about like if he were real, like the implications of our world. And I just think they did such a great job with Maruki's character, and I felt so sad one-shotting him with Lucifer, so kind of tough there.
All right,
That's
you
all.
guys got anything you would like to plug on this video?
I mean, I do have a YouTube channel, you know. You guys you guys like Hololive, maybe?
I do.
Anyone?
I like all life as well. I currently don't have any form of I don't have a YouTube channel or a Twitter account or anything, but yeah, it was just fun talking to both you and Tommy.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me on.